Cloudthief Review. The world's biggest data center just got robbed. In this book, every heist story used to revolve around the same target, a vault full of cash or jewels sitting behind thick steel doors. This summer's most talked about heist novel throws that entire idea out. The target is not money. It is data, and the building holding it is bigger than any bank vault ever built. The novel is called Cloudthief, the latest from award-winning author Nathaniel Rich, following a disillusioned climate journalist and an off-the-grid con artist on a road trip to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they plan to rob the world's largest data center. So why would anyone write a heist story built around stealing data instead of cash? Rich's answer, embedded directly in the premise, is that data has quietly become the most valuable thing most people own without realizing it. The novel is described as a heist for a new era, built on the idea that the most valuable things in life are increasingly virtual, that privacy has become something close to a punchline, and that traditional security no longer means much when the thing worth stealing does not exist in any physical form at all. A bank vault protects something you can hold. A data center protects something you cannot see, cannot touch, and increasingly cannot live without. That framing raises an obvious question worth digging into. What does it actually mean to rob a data center? And why would that make for a compelling story at all, compared to a classic bank heist? Data centers are massive physical facilities, packed with servers storing enormous quantities of information. Everything from personal records to corporate secrets to the infrastructure running much of daily digital life. Robbing one is not as simple as walking out with a bag of cash. It requires understanding physical security, digital security, and the strange, sprawling bureaucracy of the companies and governments that actually control what gets stored where. Rich's novel apparently leans into exactly that complexity, using it as the source of both tension and dark comedy throughout the book. Choosing Tulsa specifically as the setting adds another layer worth noting. Data centers of this scale tend to cluster in unglamorous, overlooked parts of the country, chosen for cheap land, cheap electricity, and low profile rather than any cultural cachet. Setting a heist novel in exactly that kind of location, rather than a more obviously cinematic city, reinforces the book's underlying argument that the most valuable, most heavily guarded assets in modern life increasingly sit in places nobody would think to look. Tucked behind unremarkable facades in towns most readers have never had a reason to think about. The pairing of characters driving the story adds another layer of contrast worth understanding. A disillusioned climate journalist brings a specific kind of exhaustion to the story, someone who has spent a career documenting a slow-moving catastrophe that most of the world seems determined to ignore. An off-the-grid con artist brings the opposite energy entirely, someone who has already given up on the systems the journalist keeps trying to hold accountable, choosing instead to exploit those same broken systems for personal gain. Putting these two temperaments together on a single road trip toward a single audacious target creates natural friction. One character still believing something can be fixed, the other convinced the only sane response is to take what you can, while the whole structure keeps falling apart. That friction is really the engine of the whole book, more than the heist mechanics themselves. Why does pairing these two specific temperaments matter so much for a story like this? Road trip narratives live or die on the chemistry between their central characters. Since so much of the book unfolds in transit, in conversation, in the space between plot points, rather than during the plot points themselves. A journalist and a con artist represent two opposite responses to the same diagnosis, that the systems governing modern life are broken, one still trying to document and fix that brokenness through honest work, the other having concluded that honest work is a losing bet entirely. Watching those two worldviews collide across a cross-country drive toward a shared target gives the book its emotional core, independent of whether the heist itself ultimately succeeds. Critics reviewing early copies of the novel have specifically highlighted its comic sensibility. describing it as capturing the utter absurdity of the modern era, rather than playing its premise entirely straight. That tonal choice matters for readers deciding whether this book fits their taste. This is not a grim, self-serious thriller about corporate espionage. It reads closer to a satire, wearing a heist novel structure, using the mechanics of a classic caper story to say something sharper about how contemporary life actually works, where privacy has eroded, where climate warnings go unheeded, and where the biggest fortunes increasingly live inside server racks rather than bank vaults. Rich himself has built a literary reputation on exactly this kind of ambitious, genre-bending nonfiction and fiction, tackling large, unwieldy contemporary subjects and finding an entry point that makes them genuinely readable rather than academic. Cloudthief appears to continue that pattern, using genre fiction's most reliable structure, the heist, as a vehicle for ideas about surveillance, climate anxiety, and the strange new value system built around data that most readers interact with daily without ever really thinking about what it means. That track record matters for how seriously critics are already taking this book, even ahead of wider release. Writers who successfully translate difficult, sprawling subjects into compelling narrative nonfiction do not always make the leap into fiction smoothly, since the skills involved, research and explanation versus plot and character, do not automatically transfer. Early reception suggests Rich has managed that transition without losing the sharp, research-grounded sensibility that built his reputation in the first place, giving Cloudthief a level of grounded plausibility that a purely fictional heist story might lack. For readers who gravitate toward smart, satirical fiction that still delivers genuine plot momentum, Cloudthief is positioning itself as one of the more distinctive entries in this summer's crowded thriller and literary fiction lineup, offering the pacing of a classic caper alongside commentary that lingers well past the book's final page. Drop a comment on whether you'd rather read about a classic bank heist or a modern data heist. Subscribe for more book breakdowns worth adding to your reading list. And share this with anyone who thinks they've already read every heist story worth reading.